Well, as we search for content, how about Stephon Diggs, newly acquired by the Buffalo Bills? He had a suggestion on Twitter yesterday, top 5 wideouts to ever play the game. Go. So we will go. And we're going to go maybe 5 rounds here, depending upon how long we talk to support each of our picks. We are going to draft, Chris, the all-time greatest receivers to ever play the game of professional football, and we are conceding that Jerry Rice is the number 1 greatest of all time. Sorry, Randy Moss. He tried to make the argument in 2012 that it's him. It's not. It's Jerry Rice. He's the GOAT. He gets we'll call it like we did a few weeks ago, the Joe Montana Memorial Draft, even though he's not dead. This is the Jerry Rice Memorial Draft, even though he's not dead. So we will continue from there. And there's no trivia question today. So, Chris, I'll just let you. How are we going to determine the first pick? Because I want the first pick. Are you going to give me the first pick?
Go ahead. I'll let you have the first pick on a day like today. Go ahead. That's fine.
Who do you think I'm going to pick?
I don't know who you're going to pick. I don't think you're going to pick Randy Moss. I don't. So I don't know where you're going to go. I'm very intrigued. Who's it going to be?
I'm picking Terrell Owens. And the difference between Terrell Owens and Randy Moss is this. Even though Terrell Owens at times was a colossal pain in the butt, plenty of receivers are colossal pains in the butt, folks, from time to time. I've heard stories about how they used to get Jerry Rice out of the locker room when they knew that the fuse was about to hit the bomb and he was going to blow. So they got him dressed and gone and in his car before the media ever showed up. But, the thing that still bothers me about Randy Moss, I play when I want to play. The quitting on the Raiders, the consistent failure to get the absolute most out of his God-given ability, that bothers me to this day. So that's why I take Terrell Owens, because all the things you can say about Terrell Owens, you can never say he did not bust his ass every single day to be the best receiver he could be, and you can never say that he quit on his team. He may have been disruptive, but he never quit on his team. The year that he was trying to get traded by the Eagles, he still had over 100 receiving yards per game in the games that he played.
Yeah, but sometimes his distractions and side antics led to him not being maybe as good as he could be and caused issues with the team too. So, I could very easily argue that as well to go, okay, yeah, he was the best receiver on that team, but that team is dysfunctional because of him. So, that's just one thing I will push on that. But I'm still going with Randy Moss as my first pick. And I hear you. The things you said are real. I get it. Randy Moss is, one of those guys we would put on the list as diva wide receivers. He's one of the greatest athletes we've ever seen in the sport. And not to say Terrell Owens is not. I get that. But I can just remember a few things. First off, seeing Randy Moss in person is a special event. It really is, because he's like a praying mantis, yet he's the fastest guy in the field. He's got some of the greatest hands we've seen in the history of the sport. You had to change your game plan when you played Randy Moss. And when I first got to Tampa Bay, the Bucs were one of the best defenses of football coming off the Super Bowl. And I remember, John Lynch and Rondé Barber talking about, the old NFC Central battles. Then they were going, gosh, good thing we don't have to deal with Randy Moss anymore. I don't have to worry about getting 40 yards deep when I'm playing cover 2 because, he could get up on my toes in 4 steps. So this is one of the greatest weapons, physically gifted specimens we've ever seen in the sport, and that's why I'll make him my number 1 guy.
And I agree with you completely, and that's the basis for my beef.
Did he capitalize on everything? I get it, but that's what made him him. Lawrence Taylor, would he have been the same if he was sitting at home lifting weights and drinking a protein shake? I don't know. That might have took the edge away from him on the field. So part of being, that guy Randy Moss is just part of him and also what made him great on the field.
There's another guy who has more than 1,000 career receiving yards than either Terrell Owens or Randy Moss, and he's still playing. My next pick, Larry Fitzgerald, who still has a chance to catch Jerry Rice, although I don't think it's going to happen. But Larry Fitzgerald is the guy who just keeps plugging away, goes about his business, never creates any issues, never creates any problems, has stayed with the Cardinals his entire career. At a time where that wanderlust eventually kicks in for a guy and he ends up with a different team, he fights to stay with the Cardinals. He takes below market deals to stay with the Cardinals, and he continues to be one of the most important players for that franchise. Surely he was a tremendous influence last year on helping Kyler Murray become as good as he was as a rookie, and Fitzgerald back for another year. We'll see how high he can push his numbers, but the most significant player in the history of the Cardinals organization, and they've been around for a long time. And look at that, putting Nick Bosa on his butt. Sit down, Nick. Now, Larry Fitzgerald for me. And you know, you could make the case, and you may be able to make the case when he's done, that he was better than Moss or Owens.
Well, you know, maybe more consistent for sure. Not as explosive with the ball in his hand or when the ball was in the air, but maybe more versatile as a complete wide receiver would be the thing that jumps out to me about Fitzgerald. And maybe could use him in different ways, slot, outside, whatever it may be, but has more of that, you know, ultimate professional approach that we saw from like a Jerry Rice that way. And I'm with you. I think Larry Fitzgerald probably would have been my next pick too. So you stole that. I'm going to stay with somebody else here who I don't think gets involved in this conversation enough. And I think that's Marvin Harrison. That's the guy I'm going to throw on this list. I mean, first off,
Who?
he
Never
did
heard
make
of him.
Marvin. You never heard of him? Well, you know,
No.
he was on the NFL All 100
I don't know anything
team,
about Marvin
right?
Harrison. I don't know anything about
You
him.
don't know?
You
Well,
don't. It's just
I
like
get it.
right over your head.
I
It's
get
right
it.
over
I
your giant
understand
head.
it.
All
Well,
right,
let me
go
just
ahead.
tell you, he's part of one of the greatest quarterback wide receiver duos we've ever seen in the history of the sport. I mean, we talk about Young and Rice and Montana and Rice. Well, right after that is Manning to Harrison. And, you know, Marvin Harrison is a guy, and listen, all you got to do is watch the NFL Top 100 and watch Bill Belichick talk about him, about how he always had to double team him, and he was very hard to figure out, you know, how they were going to use him. Harrison was a guy that, yeah, you could put in the slot, and he could run some of those really refined routes, but he also could put him outside, and he can run an 80-yard post over your head and just fly by you. So it had great versatility, you know, as far as a receiver is concerned, better than like Randy Moss and T.O. as far as versatility is concerned. You know, hey, he didn't have a big personality. He wasn't a diva wide receiver. He might have had some other issues. We know that, okay? But nonetheless, he's one of the best receivers I've seen in my lifetime. Yeah, well, you know what I'm talking about.
Next for me, Chris Carter. And look, not a spectacular game-breaking down the field guy, but he caught everything thrown in his direction. He's 6th all-time in receptions. There's a couple of tight ends in front of him, so he's 4th all-time among receivers in catches, and he is 4th all-time in receiving touchdowns with 130. All he does is catch touchdowns. Yes, that's all he does, and he did it almost as well as anyone other than, well, he did it better than anyone other than Jerry Rice, Randy Moss, and Terrell Owens. So give me Chris Carter. I mean, he was the guy that on third down, you knew he was going to be open. You knew he was going to make the catch. You knew he was going to extend the drive. And every once in a while, he'd turn the corner and he'd take off running and he'd surprise you with his ability to get to the end zone from maybe 40 yards out. But for the most part, he was just that basketball player on a football field who was always able to go grab the ball wherever it was.
Yeah, I mean, he was. He's
Chris's microphone just died. Here, is he back? Is Chris back?
You hear me now?
Are you back, Chris?
You hear me?
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, sorry. Yep, I think my AirPods died out. But either way, I'm with you there. I mean, Chris Carter, you know, he caught the ball in traffic. He could beat you deep. You know, he was a great back shoulder type thrower. You know, and another guy who was pretty versatile, especially at the end of his career. He worked the middle of the field a whole lot more than he did the outside of the field, and that's where he was special. So I'm with you there. All right. This is a tough decision here. I am going to go with Julio Jones as my next pick.
Wow.
Julio Jones, yeah, for my money, is one of the greatest receivers I've ever seen. I mean, what more can you say about Julio Jones? I mean, he's got everything to me. Size, you know, yak. When the ball's in his hand, he could take a 6-yard slant and go 80 yards for a touchdown. He could beat you deep with just pure speed. He could jump up over you like a Randy Moss, and catch the ball that way. So, you know, in my lifetime especially, and I know we're probably doing, you know, not doing some of the great receivers of yesteryear great service here because we're being a little too into modern sports here. But Julio Jones is one of the physically freakiest wide receivers we've ever seen in the league. And he's been, you know, the best receiver in football, or in that conversation for top 2 or 3, really for like the last 8 years. And that's a pretty damn good run, along with being professional along with it. So, yeah, Julio Jones makes my list.
Yeah, look, I understand that, and he's still got a long way to go left in his career, relatively speaking, and his numbers may pump up as time goes by. And I agree with you. We are showing a little bit of a bias toward guys who played more recently, but you know what? These are the guys we've seen and the guys we've studied, and all due respect to the guys of yesteryear, the game has changed, and maybe some of these guys would have had much bigger statistics and been much more memorable if they had played at the time when the rules were relaxed in favor of the passing game, but they didn't. And also, the game has exploded from the standpoint of how much we see it, how much access we have to it in fantasy football and whatnot. And I think that has contributed to this bias. Again, I'm building up to my pick, which is another guy who played more recently than not, and that's Tim Brown, your old teammate in Tampa Bay. How could you not have picked Tim Brown? Tim Brown, Hall of Famer. It took him a little while to get in, but he got in. He had nearly 1,100 receptions. He was a guy who was always consistent. He was a guy who always, he's almost like the Larry Fitzgerald of his day. You just kind of take him for granted, right? He gets it done. He generates big numbers, and because he's not flashy, because he's not loud, because he's not look at me, because he's not involved in contract disputes. I mean, the most outlandish thing he ever said came well after he retired when he suggested Bill Callahan threw Super Bowl 37 as a favor to John Gruden, which gave us something to talk about for a few days, and I appreciated that. But Tim Brown, just a rock-solid great player, and ultimately got what he deserved, a spot in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I'm not. I was gonna pick him last round. I was really kind of torn between him and Julio Jones, and I didn't go Tim Brown because I just didn't think you would do it. I didn't think you would go there quite yet. So that I got burned by that. But I got the ultimate respect for Tim Brown, and he's another guy. I mean, just can do everything, and was an ultimate professional doing it. And not to forget, I can still remember, coaches telling you, what would have Tim Brown been if he didn't tear his ACL his rookie or second year? Because, if anybody remembers, this guy won the freaking Heisman Trophy. You don't see wide receivers win the Heisman Trophy. That's how explosive he was. And he was one of the best kick returners and punt returners, but ended up being one of the greatest receivers we ever saw. And truly one of the greatest teammates I ever played with, Mike. I mean, he was awesome. And you talk about a guy who used to put perspective into me when, John Gruden used to cuss me out all the time. He didn't like it. Tim Brown, he'd always man, I've never seen a coach talk to a player like that. And he'd give me pep talks to be like, hang in there, don't listen to him, or whatever it may be. He still talks about it. So I love Tim Brown. He's one of my favorite teammates I ever had. No doubt about that. What round are we in? I don't even know what freaking round we're in right now.
I think this is round 4.
Okay, well, I'm going crazy again here, maybe, to what some people think. Andre Johnson is going to make my greatest receivers of all time list, all right? Yeah, I mean, Andre Johnson is, again, one of the freak shows of modern history at the wide receiver position. Now, he gets lost under the radar. Why? Because of his team. The Houston Texans never were really in any big playoff games. We never took them seriously as a Super Bowl contender. He played with a middle-of-the-league type quarterback his whole career and still put up gigantic numbers and was by far the number one or only weapon on that Houston Texans team his whole career. But it didn't matter. I mean, I know when I played on the Tennessee Titans, man, we used to play the Houston Texans and we would double cover him and he'd still run 70-yard posts right by us. So for me, Andre Johnson's one of the greatest receivers to ever play the game. Statistically, he's up there too. Where is he at? I just want to make sure. He's 11th all-time in receiving yards, and I think without a legit number 2 or a big-time quarterback around him, I think his stats would have even been better. So, yeah, Andre Johnson making the list for me.
Round 5, Chris Simms, and I'm going with a guy who, this is old school, real old school, well before either of us were born. Don Hutson played from 1935 to 1945 for the Packers. He had 17 touchdown receptions in 1942 in 11 games. He finished with 99 touchdown receptions for his career. That record stood for 44 years until Steve Largent broke it. He had 99 in that era. They were playing 10 games a year, 11 games a year. Don Hutson was well ahead of his time. I don't know how he would have fared. Nobody knows how he would have fared in the modern game, but he was as dominant and the most dominant receiver of his era. The most dominant receiver, really, before the NFL realized that the game's a lot more exciting if the ball's in the air more frequently.
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, it really is. And then, like I said, I'm really sorry to some of these old receivers. We have disrespected them to, Fred Biletnikoffs of the world, John Stallworths, Lynn Swans, Drew Pearsons. I mean, yes, modern day times, the NFL passing, all that has led to, what do you want to say? What are you making faces about?
They're not all-time greats. Don't mention Drew Pearson. Because, every time you mention Drew Pearson, well, fortunately, Kristen's short-staffed, so she can't hit the B-roll of the Hail Mary play. But Drew Pearson's not even in the Hall of Fame. He's not going to make this list.
Well, we're missing a lot of all-time great receivers, is what I'm saying. That's all. There's some older guys that we're leaving out, and I feel bad about it. I do. Yeah, there it is.
Geez.
Kristen can still pull it off. Way to go, Kristen. Way to go, man. Looks like a Hall of Fame type play to me. Touchdown.
Hall of Fame pass interference, offensive. All right, who's your pick?
All right.
Get the second angle too.
All right. I mean, I want to pick Steve Largent, all right, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to pick Antonio Brown. I think Antonio Brown, I don't care.
Wow.
I don't think we saw anybody do what Antonio Brown did in basically a 7-year career, all right? Because he wasn't the focal point of their offense in year 1 or even year 2, if I remember. And, of course, didn't even play last year. And, in that short of time, the numbers he put up. Now, listen, he had a good quarterback and a good offense around him and all those things. But Antonio Brown, I think if you ask Bill Belichick, what we're going to do when you play Pittsburgh? We're going to double team Antonio Brown every time. We're going to make somebody else beat us. He was that type of guy. You knew they were going to go with the ball with him. And, underneath, deep balls, it didn't matter. He could do it all. And even for his size, he's a great 50-50 ball catcher, too, which is amazing. So, I'm not in love with the person Antonio Brown. He does bother me at times with some of his antics. But I still think he's one of the greatest receivers I've seen in my lifetime. I do feel that way.
All right, that's our 5-round draft. We haven't done a 5-round draft in a long time, if ever.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.